Legacy VPN architectures were traditionally delivered via an endpoint client back to a centralized set of, VPN headend essentially, which was normally customer managed firewalls in their headquarters or data center historically. When the user wants to connect to the VPN, they're normally prompted for username and password. And with the legacy VPN architecture, the approach was essentially authenticate or verify once, and then the user would be considered trusted for the rest of that session, essentially. Slight downside to that is with historical architectures and breaking out from that centralized point, with the way we work now with larger files, and a great example of that is customers using things like 4K video. The user's traffic would essentially come into that head end, and if it needs to be routed out to a SaaS application, for example, or somewhere on the web, it would hairpin through that connectivity, which can cause bottlenecks on that kind of connection medium, and it can have a degrading effect on the end user experience. So the new approach with SASE architecture is a move more towards ZTNA, or Zero Trust Network Access. So with ZTNA, we're moving away from that essentially always trust mode once they're authenticated to a never trust methodology. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the user has to re-authenticate. We can still do more of a dynamic approach to authentication, but the user is verified on every different session. So not necessarily making the user re-authenticate by username, password, or passwordless with facial recognition as an example, but we'll validate that the risk profile of that user on device hasn't changed since they've connected. The way that the client works on the actual endpoint has changed slightly with SASE architecture and SSE. So it moves away from that prompting the user for that authentication at the start of their session, and the client itself with a ZTNA kind of component actually makes the decision on behalf of the user on how they connect to the resource that they want to connect to. So if it's via a browser session, the client will make that decision. If they need to connect to the VPN, the client will make that decision for them. And again, like I mentioned before, if they've already authenticated, the client will connect to the VPN on their behalf, but not necessarily prompt them for another authentication. A great use case for the kind of new world of SSE connectivity. If you look at historically, if you had a global deployment across multiple regions, say Americas, EMEA and Far East, it would have been a case of, for the end user experience, you would have wanted to have multiple deployed VPN headends, and the users would connect to their local headend. If you think about wanting to roll out a new application globally, as an example, you'd have to put routing policies in place from each of those different headends, so the routing complexity can be quite challenging. In the new world with SSE, if the users are connecting to that VPN headend via the SSE provider, you've got one place to manage those policies regardless of the user's region. So if you want to deploy a new application globally at scale, it can be a much, much quicker experience using SSE.